The mountain didn't care who she was. It didn't care about her billion-dollar deal, her corner office, or the insurance denial letter sitting in a manila folder in a small house 30 miles away. The letter that had slowly been killing a 7-year-old girl named Ella Hayes. The mountain just came down, all at once, and took Vivian Sterling's SUV with it. The man who pulled her out of that wreckage was the same man whose daughter she had condemned. He knew it, and he saved her anyway. If you're watching this story, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let me see how far this has traveled. Mom. Part 1. The Storm Before the Storm. The letter had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 11 days. Landon Hayes knew exactly how many days because he'd counted them the same way he used to count hours before a mission. Not out of anticipation, but out of the particular discipline it takes to hold yourself together when everything around you is coming apart. 11 days since the envelope from Meridian Health Corporation had arrived. 11 days since he had read the words claim denied, procedure deemed elective and not medically necessary, and felt something go very quiet inside him. Not the rage. The rage came later in the truck, with the windows rolled up where Ella couldn't hear him. What went quiet first was the part of him that still believed the world operated on some basic level of fairness. He folded the letter the same way every morning, tucked it back into the envelope, set it on the counter where he could see it. He didn't know why he kept doing that. Maybe so he wouldn't forget. Maybe so he'd remember to make the next call, send the next appeal, find the next angle. Ella's cardiologist, Dr. Marianne Chu, had been clear with him back in February, clearer than Landon had wanted her to be. The defect in Ella's heart was not getting better on its own. The surgery was not optional. It was a matter of time, and time had a way of running out faster than insurance companies processed appeals. "Dad!" Ella's voice came from the hallway, still thick with sleep. "You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep." He turned from the counter and found her standing in the doorway in the oversized Seahawks jersey she used as a nightgown, her dark hair sticking up on one side, her eyes still half closed. 7 years old, and already she had the posture of someone who'd learned not to make too much noise. He hated that he'd done that to her, or that life had, or that there wasn't much difference between the two. "Is it a work day?" she asked. "It's Saturday, Bug. So why are you in your work clothes?" He looked down at himself. Cargo pants, boots, a long-sleeve thermal. He hadn't realized. "Habit," he said. She padded into the kitchen and climbed up onto the stool at the counter, pulling her knees to her chest. She didn't ask about the envelope. She never asked about the envelope. But her eyes went to it for just a second, the same way they always did, and then she looked away. "Can we make pancakes?" "Yeah," Landon said. "We can make pancakes." Pocket. He'd been a maintenance supervisor at the Cascade Ridge Resort and Nature Preserve for 2 years now, long enough to know every trail, every access road, every service tunnel and drainage channel on 4,300 acres of Pacific Northwest wilderness. The job paid decent, came with benefits that were starting to look like a sick joke, and kept him outdoors, which was the part that mattered most. He'd tried the desk job after he got out of the Navy. 3 weeks. That was all he'd lasted before the walls started pressing in. His foreman, a thick-shouldered man named Dale Pruitt who'd been running maintenance crews in the Cascades for 20 years, called him around noon on Saturday. "You see the weather advisory?" Landon was in the garage replacing a spark plug on his truck, Ella watching from a folding chair with a book open on her lap that she wasn't actually reading. "Storm system moving in from the coast," he said. "They were talking about it on the radio this morning." "It's not just a storm system," Dale said. "NWS just upgraded it. Wind gusts to 60, possible 70 at elevation. Rain totals that are going to saturate everything. Soil up on the north face is already at capacity from last week." A pause. "Landon, I'm serious. The ranger station up on Route 9 is going to need the access road checked. If that slope behind the old fire lookout cuts loose, I know the slope. I'm not asking you to go up tonight. I know," Landon said, "but I'll check the drainage culverts in the morning if it hits like they're saying, before the resort guests start moving around." "Good." Another pause. "How's Ella?" "She's good, reading her book." "She's not reading," Ella said without looking up. Dale laughed on the other end. "Bring her by the station sometime. Karen's been asking about her." After he hung up, Landon looked at the sky through the garage door. It had gone the color of old pewter, that low, flat ceiling that meant the system was closer than the advisory suggested. He could smell the rain coming, not the clean smell people in cities talked about, but the deep mineral heaviness that preceded real weather, the kind of rain that moved Earth. Vivian Sterling's assistant called her at 12:47 p.m. Pacific Time, which meant Marcus Chen had been tracking the weather radar for at least 2 hours before working up the nerve to dial. She was already in the car. Vivian. His voice had that particular tension in it, the tone he used when he was trying very hard not to say "I told you so" before he'd even made his point. The highway advisory just went to level 2. The mountain passes are, I'm aware of the passes, Marcus. The Whitmore deal closes Monday morning. If you miss the signing, I won't miss the signing. You could reschedule the drive to tomorrow. The drive is today. She adjusted her grip on the wheel. The SUV, a black Lexus GX barely 8 months old, was handling the rising wind without complaint, and Vivian had always found a certain satisfaction in machinery that did exactly what it was supposed to do. The delay in Seattle already cost us 3 days. I'm not handing Whitmore's legal team another window to renegotiate. Vivian, Marcus. Her voice dropped a register, not into cruelty, but into the kind of finality that ended conversations. I'll call you when I reach the resort. She ended the call and set the phone in the cup holder. The thing people misunderstood about Vivian Sterling was that she wasn't reckless. She was calculating. There was a difference, and it was a difference that had taken her from a junior analyst position at 23 to the chief executive seat of Meridian Health Corporation at 29. Every risk she took was weighed. Every variable she could account for, she did. The storm was a variable. The road conditions were a variable. The Whitmore deal was a certainty. A $1.3 billion acquisition that would extend Meridian's coverage network into 6 new states, and certainties did not wait for variables to resolve themselves. She turned the heat up slightly. Outside, the first real drops of rain began to hit the windshield. What Vivian Sterling did not account for, what no calculation could have accounted for, was the particular geology of the ridge above Highway 9, which had been quietly drinking in a week's worth of saturated groundwater, and which had reached sometime in the late afternoon hours of that Saturday, the precise tipping point between stability and catastrophic failure. Landon dropped Ella at the Pruitt house around 4. Dale's wife Karen opened the door before he'd finished knocking, already dressed in a flour-dusted apron, and Ella walked inside like she owned the place, which was basically accurate. The Pruitts didn't have grandchildren yet and were making do with borrowed ones. Storm's moving fast, Dale said from behind Karen's shoulder. Road crews are already getting calls about debris on the lower switchbacks. I know. Landon handed over Ella's overnight bag. I'm going to run up and check the culvert at mile marker 11 before it gets dark. The drainage there was marginal last week. Landon, 30 minutes. I'll be back down before the main system hits. Dale looked at him the way men who've spent 20 years in mountain country look at each other when someone says something that sounds reasonable but isn't. Take your gear. Always do. He drove up Highway 9 with the truck's wipers working hard and the radio cycling through the same weather advisory on repeat. The wind was picking up in gusts, pushing at the truck's body, and the temperature had dropped 8 degrees since noon. The trees on either side of the road were moving in that particular way. Not the loose, easy movement of a normal wind, but the deeper, rhythmic shudder that meant the whole canopy was being pushed from somewhere high above. He reached mile marker 11 and parked on the gravel shoulder. The culvert was running heavy, brown water moving fast through the pipe under the road, which was expected. What wasn't expected was the sound. A low, intermittent creak from somewhere up the slope, above the tree line, where the ridge bent east toward the old fire lookout. Landon stood beside his truck and listened. He'd learned a long time ago to trust sound in terrain he knew. The mountain didn't announce itself in obvious ways. It whispered first. He was reaching back into the truck cab for his radio when he heard the car. It came down the highway too fast for conditions. He heard the engine before he saw the headlights, and then the headlights came around the upper curve, and he had just enough time to register the black SUV's speed before the world above him moved. There was no explosion, no crack, just a deep grinding shift, like the earth clearing its throat, and then the hillside above the road came down in a single dark wave. Not a rock slide, but a full debris flow, saturated soil and broken timber and boulders the size of chest freezers riding a wave of brown water that crossed the road in less than 4 seconds. The SUV never had a chance to brake. Landon watched it happen from 30 yards back, pinned against his truck door by the force of the pressure wave that rolled out ahead of the slide. The Lexus caught the edge of the flow on its driver's side, slewed sideways, and went through the guardrail like the guardrail was made of paper. The sound it made going over the edge, that particular tearing, grinding shriek of metal, was a sound he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. Then silence, or what passed for silence with the rain coming down hard and the debris still settling on the road. Landon moved. He didn't think about it. That was the honest answer he would have given if anyone had asked. There was no internal debate, no weighing of risk, no moment of hesitation. His body knew what to do before his mind caught up, because that was what 11 years in the teams had built into him. Not bravery exactly, which was a word civilians used, but the capacity to act in the space where other people froze. He pulled the gear bag from the bed of his truck in 30 seconds. Rope, harness, carabiners, medical kit, emergency blanket. He'd kept the bag loaded since his first winter at the resort, not out of paranoia but out of the same quiet discipline that kept the letter on the counter, that kept his boots by the door, that kept him ready for the thing he hoped would never come. The ravine where the SUV had gone over was steep, maybe 60 degrees at the top, easing to 40 as it dropped toward the drainage creek at the bottom. The slide debris had come to rest across the road and partway over the edge, creating a loose, unstable ramp of broken earth and timber that was still shifting. Landon worked around it, found a rock anchor 15 feet back from the break in the guardrail, rigged the rope in under 2 minutes, and went over the edge. The descent was ugly. The slope was wet and came apart under his boots in chunks, and twice he had to stop and wait for small secondary slides to pass before he could continue. His headlamp caught the SUV about 40 feet down. It had come to rest against a stand of old-growth fir that had stopped it maybe 60 yards above the creek, which was running full and loud in the dark below. The vehicle was on its side, driver's door against the slope. "Hey," he called out when he was close enough for his voice to carry over the rain. "Can you hear me?" "Nothing." "I'm coming to you. You're going to be okay." He said it not because he knew it was true, but because the human voice was medicine when everything else had gone wrong, and he'd learned that in places where medicine was the only thing he had. He reached the passenger side of the SUV, now facing up toward the sky, and got a hand on the door handle. It was jammed. He tried the window, cracked but not shattered. He unclipped the glass breaker from his kit and hit it once, clean, and the window came apart in pebbled chunks. The woman inside was still belted in, hanging sideways against the door that was against the slope. She was breathing. He heard it before he saw her. But it was the shallow, uneven breathing of someone in shock. There was blood on her face from a cut at the hairline, already mixing with rain coming in through the broken window. Her coat was expensive. Her hands were on the steering wheel, both of them, like she was still trying to drive. "Hey," Landon said, more quietly this time. "I need you to look at me." Her eyes opened. Dark. Unfocused at first. Then they found his face, and something in them sharpened. Not fully, but enough. "Can you tell me your name?" A long pause. "Vivian." Her voice was a wreck, dry and cracked, and too small for the kind of woman she clearly was. "Vivian Sterling." "Okay, Vivian, I'm Landon. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay still while I check you first. Can you do that?" She made a sound that might have been a yes. He ran through the assessment the same way he'd been trained: airway, breathing, circulation, disability, exposure. The cut on her head was messy but not arterial. Her pupils responded unevenly to his light, which he didn't love. Her right arm moved on command. Her left was braced against the door below her, and she flinched hard when he touched the elbow. Possible fracture. Her legs responded, which was the thing that mattered most. "Does it hurt when you breathe?" "Everything hurts when I breathe." "On a scale, I don't do pain scales." A beat. 7. He almost smiled at that. Not quite. "Ribs, maybe. Can you move your feet?" She moved them. "Good. I'm going to get the belt off you, and we're going to get you through this window. It's going to hurt." "I know it's going to hurt." She said it with a flatness that told him she'd already arrived at this conclusion independently and was not looking for reassurance that he could work with. It took 12 minutes to get her out. 12 minutes of controlled, methodical work while the slope above them made sounds that he was deliberately not thinking about, while the creek below them rose audibly in the dark, while the temperature continued to drop and the rain came in sideways. She didn't scream. She made one sharp sound when her left arm cleared the window frame and he had to catch her full weight as she came through. She was slight, but the awkward angle sent them both against the slope. And then she was out, sitting against the hillside with his emergency blanket around her shoulders, breathing hard. "You have a car up there?" she asked. "On the road." "The road is—" She stopped, looked up at where the debris flow had buried 30 yards of highway. "Gone. There's a ranger cabin about a mile east along the service road. We're going there." She looked at him. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time. "Your maintenance." He glanced down at the logo on his jacket. Cascade Ridge Resort, Maintenance Division. "Yeah." "Do you know what you're doing?" It was a fair question. He didn't hold it against her. "I know what I'm doing," he said, and he helped her to her feet. The walk to the cabin was a mile and a half, not one. He'd miscalculated in the dark, or the trail had washed out in places and forced detours. And it took them the better part of an hour. Vivian Sterling walked on her own for the first 20 minutes before her legs started giving out on her, and she didn't ask for help when they did. He noticed and adjusted, moving under her left arm to support her weight, and she accepted it without comment, which he respected. She passed out twice, brief, both times, 10, 15 seconds, and came back with the particular clarity of someone running on adrenaline reserves that were almost spent. "Stay with me," he told her the second time. "Talk to me." "About what?" "Anything." A silence. Then, grudgingly, "I'm supposed to close a deal on Monday." "What kind of deal?" "The kind that requires getting to a resort in a mountain pass during a level 2 weather advisory." "That sounds like a bad decision." "It does in retrospect." A pause, and something flickered across her face that might have been the beginning of a real thought. But the cabin came into view through the trees before she finished it. The ranger cabin was locked. Landon used a technique he'd learned in circumstances he didn't care to detail and had the door open in 40 seconds. He got her inside and onto the narrow cot along the back wall, got the emergency blanket back around her, found wood for the cast iron stove, and got a fire going. The cabin smelled of dust and old smoke and something faintly chemical from a box of old trail markers stacked by the door. He knelt beside her and started working on the cut at her hairline, cleaning it with the kit, butterfly closures across the deepest part. "You have a concussion," he told her. "How bad?" "Medium. I need you to stay awake for a while longer." She was quiet for a moment, watching him work. He was aware of the watching in the way you become aware of something you're trying to ignore. "Who taught you to do this?" she asked. "The Navy." A pause. "You were in the Navy?" "Yeah." "How long?" 11 years. She absorbed this. The fire was beginning to catch and throw heat, and the cabin was marginally warmer. Outside, the storm had reached its full voice, rain against the roof, wind through the trees, the occasional crack of something giving way somewhere in the dark. He was reaching for his pack to radio for emergency services when her coat shifted and something fell from the inner pocket. A document, folded, damp at the edges. It landed face up on the floor between them. Landon picked it up. He was only going to check for identification. That was all he was doing. He unfolded the top edge to look for a name and instead found himself looking at a Meridian Health Corporation letterhead. His hands stopped moving. He didn't unfold it further. He didn't need to. He'd been looking at the same letterhead for 11 days. He'd memorized the font, the logo, the exact shade of blue they used for the company name. He'd memorized it the way you memorize things that have altered the shape of your life. He looked up at the woman on the cot. Vivian Sterling, CEO, Meridian Health Corporation. She was watching him, and something in his expression had shifted enough that she felt it. He saw her register it, saw her pull back slightly against the wall, the way people pull back when they realize they've misread the room. "What is it?" she asked. Landon didn't answer right away. He set the document on the floor, carefully, precisely. The same way he folded the letter every morning and set it back on the counter. Then he reached for the radio. The radio didn't work. Landon pressed the transmit button 3 times, got static each time, and set it down on the floor beside him with the particular calm of someone who has learned that losing his composure over equipment failure does not fix equipment failure. The storm was eating the signal. He'd known it was a possibility. He switched to his cell phone and found 2 bars, enough to send a text, maybe, if the tower wasn't also fighting the weather. He typed the cabin's GPS coordinates from memory, added survivor, non-critical, need evac when road clears, and sent it to Dale Pruitt's number. The message sat at the top of the screen with a spinning indicator for 30 seconds, then showed delivered. Whether Dale had signal to receive it was a different question entirely. He set the phone down and looked at Vivian Sterling. She was watching him with those dark eyes that didn't give much away, her back against the cabin wall, the emergency blanket pulled tight across her shoulders. The butterfly closures on her hairline had held. The fire in the stove was doing its job. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been inside a car when a mountain came down on it. And yet there was something in her posture, even now, that refused to fully collapse. She held herself with the particular rigidity of someone who had spent a long time making sure no one in the room could tell when she was struggling. Landon recognized it because he did the same thing. He picked up the document from the floor, held it between his fingers without unfolding it further. "You're the CEO of Meridian Health," he said. Not a question. A pause. She seemed to be deciding something. "Yes." "How long?" 14 months. He nodded slowly, set the document on the floor again, stood up, and crossed to the stove and checked the fire more out of needing something to do with his hands than out of any actual concern for the fire, which was burning fine. "My daughter's name is Ella," he said. "She's 7. Vivian didn't say anything. "She has a congenital heart defect, hypoplastic, partial. Her cardiologist says the corrective surgery is the only real option. Without it—" He stopped, picked up a split of wood and put it in the stove. "You know what happens without it. Your company knows what happens without it, because it was in the claim documentation. The surgical team submitted 43 pages of documentation." The silence in the cabin had changed quality. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the east wall, and the stovepipe rattled. "Meridian denied the claim," he continued, 11 days ago. "Elective procedure, not medically necessary." He said it in the flat, recitative tone of a man who had read those words enough times to hate every individual syllable. "I've filed an appeal. My appeal is sitting somewhere in your system right now." Vivian's voice, when it came, was careful. Not cold exactly, but controlled in a way that probably cost her something at the moment. "I don't review individual claims." "I know you don't." "There's a clinical review process. I know there's a process." He turned from the stove and looked at her directly. "I've talked to 4 people in that process in the last 11 days. I've been transferred 7 times. I've submitted documentation twice. I've spoken to a reviewer named Sandra Kowalski, who told me the decision was final and that I could submit a second-level appeal, which would take 60 to 90 business days." He let that land. "Ella doesn't have 60 to 90 business days." Vivian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He caught it because he was watching for it. Not out of cruelty, but because he needed to know whether there was anything real behind the corporate composure, whether any of it registered. "I'm sorry," she said. "It came out wrong." He could tell from her face that she knew it came out wrong the moment she said it. Too formal, too automatic, the kind of sorry that gets said in conference rooms before the meeting moves to the next agenda item. "Don't," he said. She stopped. He looked at her for another moment. Then he pulled the second folding chair from the corner of the cabin, set it near the stove, and sat down. He was tired in the bone-deep way that came not from exertion, but from the particular weight of holding rage in careful containment over a long period of time. "I'm going to keep you alive tonight," he said, "because that's what I do. Because I don't leave people behind. That's not negotiable, and it has nothing to do with what I just told you." He met her eyes. "But I needed you to know, because you're the person who can fix it. And I needed you to know that I know that. Vivian Sterling looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said quietly, "How old did you say she was?" 7. Something shifted in her face. Small. She controlled it quickly, but it was there. "Tell me about her," she said. He hadn't expected that. He looked at her, trying to gauge it, whether it was deflection, whether it was genuine, whether it even mattered right now. And then he decided it didn't matter. Talking about Ella was the one thing that didn't feel like holding something back. "She's stubborn," he said. "Gets it from her mother." A pause. "Her mother's gone. 3 years now. Car accident." He said it in the same flat register he used for everything factual. "She's been stubborn in the right ways since then. She reads constantly. Everything. Instruction manuals, cereal boxes. She read the entire HOA guidelines document for our neighborhood last year, and then corrected me when I parked the truck wrong." Vivian made a sound. Small, not quite a laugh. "She likes soccer, even though she can't play it right now. Can't run hard. Doctor's orders." He looked at the floor. "She sits on the sideline and she coaches the other kids, 7 years old. She coaches them. They actually listen." "That sounds like someone who's going to be difficult to work for someday," Vivian said. "Yeah." He almost smiled. "That's what I'm counting on." The fire crackled. The storm pushed at the roof. Somewhere outside, something large, a tree or a section of hillside, let go with a long, dragging crash that faded into the rain. Vivian shifted on the cot and made a controlled sound that meant the ribs. He was on his feet before she finished the sound, crossing to her, kneeling. "Easy. Don't twist." "I'm not twisting," but she'd gone slightly pale under the blood and the grime. "Rate it." "I already told you I don't rate it." A pause. 8. He worked the blanket aside and pressed carefully along her left side, watching her face for the involuntary signals that were more honest than the verbal ones. She flinched at the 5th rib, the 6th. Didn't flinch at the 7th, which was the one that worried him most because the 7th was adjacent to things he didn't want damaged. "Breathe for me, deep as you can." She breathed. It was shallow and controlled, and he could hear the slight catch at the top of the inhale. "Cracked. Maybe 2 of them," he said. "I don't think anything's displaced." What would displaced mean? It would mean we'd be having a different conversation. She absorbed that. "So what do we do?" "Keep you breathing, keep you warm, keep you still." He sat back on his heels. "And keep you awake for at least another 2 hours given the head." "Wonderful," she said, and the word carried just enough dry weight that he found himself recalibrating slightly. She wasn't what he'd expected. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Someone smoother, maybe? More practiced at presenting a surface. She had the surface, but underneath it something moved that wasn't entirely what the surface suggested. He went back to the chair, picked up the radio, and tried it again. Still static. "Tell me something," she said. He looked up. "The Navy. What did you do?" "SEAL teams." She took that in. "How long in the field?" "Most of the 11 years, some instructor time at the end." "Why'd you leave?" He thought about the real answer, which was complicated, and gave her the version that was true, but simpler. Ella needed a parent who came home. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "And you ended up here, running maintenance on a mountain." "Someone has to." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She seemed to decide not to push that particular thread. She shifted again, more carefully this time, and looked at the ceiling of the cabin, which was old pine gone dark with years of stove smoke. "How long do you think until they can get to us?" "Depends on how bad the slide is. If it closed the road completely, which from what I saw, it did, they have to come up the East Service route. That's longer, the grade's worse, and in this weather they won't run heavy equipment at night." He looked at the window. The darkness outside was absolute. "Morning probably, possibly mid-morning if the rain keeps up." She nodded, didn't complain. That was something. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I'll check you every 45 minutes." "I won't sleep." "You don't have to sleep. Just rest. Stop moving." "I'm not moving." "You're tensing every time a sound comes from outside." "That's movement. Stop it." She looked at him with an expression that suggested people did not often speak to her this way. Then she settled back against the wall, pulled the blanket up, and closed her eyes. He watched her breathing for a minute. Then he reached into his pack for the protein bar he kept in the front pocket and ate half of it in 2 bites, tasting nothing, and sat with his elbows on his knees in the firelight and thought about Ella. She lasted about 20 minutes before she spoke again. What was the claim number? He looked up. Her eyes were still closed. The Meridian denial, she said. What was the claim number? He reached for his phone. The denial letter was photographed in his camera roll. He'd done that the first day because he was the kind of person who made backups. He found it, read her the claim reference number. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. Say it again. He said it again. She appeared to be memorizing it. He watched her lips move slightly, the way people's lips move when they're committing something to a specific part of their memory. I'm not promising anything tonight, she said. I'm not asking for promises. I want to be clear about that. I don't know the specifics of the case. I don't know what the clinical reviewers found or what the appeals process has. I know you don't know. I'm just saying. Vivian, he said her name once, quietly. I heard you. I'm not asking you for anything tonight except to stay alive. She went quiet. Then, that's a very strange thing to say to someone. It's a very strange night. She made that almost laugh sound again. Smaller this time. Outside, the rain was shifting, not lighter yet, but changing angle, which sometimes meant the system was moving through. Landon got up and added wood to the stove and checked the window, seeing nothing but his own reflection and the dark. He tried the radio again, static, then a broken fragment of something that might have been a voice and then was gone. He went back to the chair. The cabin was warm enough now, vivid moving shadows on the walls from the stove grate. My father was military, Vivian said. Not like she was starting a conversation, more like she was saying something that had been sitting in her throat for a while. Marine Corps. 2 tours before I was born, 1 when I was 6. What branch of medicine was he in? She looked at him. How did you know he was medical? You asked intelligent questions about the rib assessment, and you knew what I meant when I mentioned displacement, medical family or medical education, and you're running a healthcare corporation, so... He was a trauma surgeon after he got out. A pause. He was very good at the field version and not very good at the civilian version. Too slow, too many administrators. He spent a lot of time being angry about systems that couldn't move fast enough. I know the feeling. Yes, she said. I imagine you do. She looked at the fire. He thought I should go into medicine. I chose business because I genuinely believed that running the financial side of healthcare was where you could create the most change. Fix the systems from above instead of fighting them from inside. What happened to that idea? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. It turns out, she said finally, that when you're inside the system trying to run it, you start to think in the system's language. And the system's language is about margins and risk pools and actuarial models. And somewhere along the way, She stopped. The actual people stopped being the point. He didn't say anything. I know how that sounds, she said. It sounds like something you're figuring out about yourself in a mountain cabin at 2 a.m. after a car accident, he said. I'm not judging the timeline. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Then she looked back at the fire. She really coaches the other kids? She said. Ella? Yeah. He leaned back in the chair. Last season, she told a kid named Brandon that his positioning was, and I'm quoting, strategically unfortunate. Kid was 9, he fixed his positioning. Vivian Sterling laughed. A real one this time. Short, rough, immediately followed by a sharp hiss because of the ribs. She pressed her right hand to her left side. Don't do that, he said. You made me. I didn't make you do anything. You told me something funny. I'll stop. Don't. She breathed carefully through the pain. Keep talking about her. So he did. He told her about this morning Ella had reorganized the kitchen while he was at work because, in her estimation, his system was inefficient. He told her about the drawing Ella had made of the 2 of them that still hung on the refrigerator. He'd noticed she'd given him a cape in the drawing, which he'd tried to ask her about, and she'd said very matter-of-factly that it was a rain jacket, Dad, and moved on. He told her about the way Ella still slept with a stuffed elephant named, without irony, Gerald, and how she'd told him last month that she was probably getting too old for stuffed animals, but she was willing to give Gerald 2 more years. Vivian listened. She didn't perform listening, didn't nod at calculated intervals or make small sounds of engagement. She just listened, looking at the fire, and he could feel the quality of her attention even when her eyes were closed. Around 2:30, her breathing changed. He was across the room and checking her before the second irregular breath completed itself, 2 fingers at her wrist, eyes on her face. Vivian? Her eyes opened, slightly glazed. Stay with me. What's your name? I know my name. Say it. Vivian Sterling, CEO, Meridian Health. A pause, and her voice was thinner than it had been. I feel cold. That was wrong. The cabin was adequately warm. He got his hand against her forehead. Her skin had gone the color of old candle wax, and there was a fine sheen of sweat along her hairline that hadn't been there an hour ago. You're going into shock. He said it straight because there was no productive version of softening it. He was already moving, pulling the second emergency blanket from the kit, getting it over her. Lean forward for me. Easy. I'm fine. You're not fine. Lean forward. She leaned forward with his hand behind her shoulders, and he listened to her back, pressing his ear to the blanket. Crude, but effective. The right side sounded clear. The left... He pulled back, made himself think through it methodically, the rib fracture, the impact, the way she'd been positioned in the vehicle. Internal bleeding was possible. Pneumothorax was possible. Neither was something he could address here with what he had, and both required a surgical suite within a window he needed to calculate correctly. I need to know if your breathing is getting harder, he said. Not if it hurts. If it's harder. More effort. A pause while she assessed honestly. A little harder. I thought it was the pain. It might be, but I want you to tell me every 20 minutes, and I want you to be exact. Not I think. Exact. Can you do that? Yes. Okay. He got her back against the wall, positioned so the compromised side was elevated slightly. I'm going to keep you warm, and I need you to talk to me. About what? Anything. Keep your voice up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said without preamble, My mother left when I was 8. My father raised me. He worked a lot, which meant I spent a lot of time alone, which meant I read a lot, which meant I was better at concepts than people by the time I was an adult. She paused, breathing carefully. I've been told I'm difficult to know. Who told you that? My last 3 executive assistants, my ex-partner, my board, collectively, on one memorable occasion. Your board told you you're difficult to know? They put it differently, strategically opaque, which is the corporate version of the same thing. He sat back down. Watching her color, watching her chest rise and fall, measuring the interval and the effort. You got your father's way with systems. She turned her head to look at him. What does that mean? You both went into your fields thinking you could fix them from inside. You both ended up fighting the same thing from different sides. She was quiet for a moment. He died 4 years ago, she said. Heart attack. 61 years old. Another pause. He never said he was proud of what I'd built. He came to the company launch and he shook my hand, which was how he showed pride, I think. But he never said it. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe. She looked at the ceiling. Or maybe he could see something I couldn't. The stove ticked. The rain hammered the roof. Landon got up and added wood again and tried the radio again. And this time, through the static, he caught a fragment of Dale Pruitt's voice saying something with the word cabin in it, and then it was gone. He pressed transmit. Dale Pruitt, if you copy, I'm at the Ridgeline 7 cabin with a survivor. She needs evac, possible internal injury. Copy? Static. Then, copy. Ridgeline. Morning? Gone again. He set the radio down, looked at Vivian. Somebody knows where we are. Something in her face eased. Not much, but a little. Good, she said. He moved his chair closer to the cot so he could watch her without having to cross the room every 20 minutes. She noticed, but didn't comment. He was close enough to hear the quality of her breathing. to catch the changes he needed to catch, and far enough that neither of them had to be self-conscious about the proximity. Around 3:15, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "When you found out who I was, when you saw the letterhead." She looked at him directly. "What did you feel?" He thought about the honest answer, which was not a simple one.
"There was a moment," he said slowly, "where I understood every story I'd ever heard about people who do something terrible in a terrible moment and then can't explain why. I understood it from the inside." A pause. And then the moment passed. "What made it pass?" "You were hurt." He said it simply. "And you were in front of me. An abstract revenge and an actual injured person in front of you are two completely different things." She absorbed this. "Also," he said, "you're not going to do Ella any good if you're dead." She made the almost laugh sound again, but softer this time, more careful around the ribs. "That's very practical. I'm a practical person." "I know." She said it like she'd already established this, like it was a fact about him she'd filed somewhere. Then she closed her eyes again. "I'm not going to sleep." "I know. I'm just resting my eyes." "I know." Her breathing steadied, not the shallow, effortful breathing of the previous hour, something more even, more regular. The color was coming back to her face in increments. He watched the rise and fall of her chest for 20 minutes without looking away, because that was his job right now, and there was nothing else. At some point past 4 in the morning, he noticed that her left hand, which had been braced against her side, had relaxed. Her fingers were half open. She looked, for the first time since he'd pulled her through the window of the ruined Lexus, like someone who had stopped bracing for the next thing. He didn't lower his guard. He'd done this long enough to know that the moment you stopped watching was the moment things changed. But he let himself be, for just a second, something other than tense. He thought about Ella at Dale and Karen's house, sleeping in the guest room with Gerald tucked under one arm, not knowing that her father was sitting in a ranger cabin in the mountains keeping a stranger alive through a storm. He thought about the letter on the counter, folded in its envelope. He thought about Dr. Chu's face in the consultation room when she'd used the phrase surgical window in a sentence that also contained the words narrowing and not indefinitely. He thought about the woman on the cot across from him, who ran the company that had written the letter, and who had just told him about her father's handshake and meant something by it that she wasn't entirely able to say. He tried the radio one more time at 4:30. This time Dale's voice came through clear enough. "Landon, evac team is staged at the east gate. Road crew says they can have the service route passable by first light. How's your survivor?" "Stable," he said. "Possible rib fractures, concussion, some sign of shock that's resolved. She needs imaging when she gets down." "Copy that. Hang tight. 2-3 hours." "Copy." He set the radio down. 2 or 3 hours. He could do 2 or 3 hours. He'd done longer with considerably less. Vivian's eyes had opened at the sound of the radio. She'd heard it. 2 or 3 hours, he confirmed. She nodded once. Then, "Landon." "Yeah." "The claim number." She said it carefully, like she was placing something fragile on a shelf. "I haven't forgotten it." He looked at her for a moment in the firelight. She looked back at him steadily, without the corporate composure, and without the apology, and without anything except the particular directness of someone who is saying the most honest thing they know how to say at that particular moment. "Okay," he said. He stoked the fire one more time and settled back in the chair and watched the window for the first gray thread of dawn. The first gray thread of dawn didn't come at 5. It didn't come at 5:30 either. The storm had thickened again somewhere around 4:45. A second wave rolling in behind the first, the way mountain systems sometimes doubled back on themselves. And by the time the window should have been showing the beginning of pale light, it was instead showing nothing but dark and rain and the occasional white flash of something moving in the wind. Landon had tracked the change in pressure the way he tracked everything. Not with instruments, but with the accumulated knowledge of a body that had spent years learning to read weather as a tactical variable. The temperature had dropped again. The rain on the roof had gone from the soft percussion of ordinary rainfall to something harder, more insistent, with a granular quality that meant it was mixing with ice at elevation. He tried the radio at 5. Dale's voice came back thin and broken. "Second system. Route crew standing, possibly pushing to mid-morning." Mid-morning. He did the math. That was 6, maybe 7 hours from when he'd gotten her into the cabin. He looked at Vivian. She was awake. Had been awake since around 4, when she'd stopped pretending to rest and started watching the window the way he was watching it. Not with fear exactly, but with the focused attention of someone running calculations she didn't like the results of. "How are you breathing?" he asked. "Same as 20 minutes ago." "That's not an answer." "It's not worse," she said. "It's the same." He crossed to her and went through the check again. Pulse, color, the careful pressure along her left side. She was still pale, but the waxy shock pale from 3 in the morning had moved back towards something more like exhaustion pale, which was different. Her pulse was steady. When he pressed below the 5th rib, she made the same controlled sound she'd been making all night. Not worse, not better. "Okay," he said. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being okay." "That's either reassuring or concerning." "It's reassuring," he said. He moved back to the chair but stayed angled toward her rather than facing the stove. "How's the head?" "Present?" "Headache?" "Yes." "Rate it." 4, maybe 5. She looked at him. "It was a 7 2 hours ago." "Good." She shifted. Made it careful, but couldn't entirely suppress the sharp intake at the top of the movement. He watched her breathe through it. 3 controlled breaths, jaw set, eyes on the middle distance, and waited. "Tell me something," she said when she was through it. "About what?" "Anything. You were talking earlier and it helped." She said it without looking at him, like admitting it cost something. It made the pain easier to track against something. He understood that. Pain without external reference collapsed inward on itself and got bigger. He told that to men who were hurt and alone in circumstances that were significantly worse than this one. He settled back in the chair. "What do you want to know?" "Tell me about the SEAL teams, not the missions, just what it was like." He thought about that for a moment. "Mostly it was waiting," he said. "People think it's all movement and contact, but most of it is waiting. Staging areas, holding positions, transit time that felt like it had no end. You learn very quickly that if you can't manage your own mind in a small space with nothing happening, you're not going to be functional when something happens. How do you manage it? You find a thing to think about that doesn't cost you anything. Something neutral. A lot of guys did math. Some of them planned house projects they'd never build." He looked at the stove. "I used to plan the week's meals. Everything Ella would eat for the week. What day, what time, what she'd need for lunch at school." Vivian looked at him. "You planned meals during operations, during the waiting parts. That's..." She paused. "Strange." "I was going to say human." He didn't respond to that. He looked at the window where the ice rain was making a sound like static against the glass. "What did you cook?" she asked. "Tuesday was always pasta. She's predictable about pasta. Wednesday was whatever she asked for Monday, because I'd need 2 days to shop for it if it was something complicated. Thursday was leftovers, and she pretended to hate that, but she actually ate more on leftover nights than on fresh cook nights, which I never mentioned." He paused. "Sunday was pancakes. Always." "Like this morning." "Like every Sunday." She was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. Outside, the wind pushed at the north wall of the cabin with a prolonged moaning pressure and then let go. "My mother used to make rice congee," Vivian said. It came out without preamble, like something she'd decided to say before she could reconsider it. "Before she left." "Sunday mornings." The whole apartment smelled like ginger and scallions. She looked at the far wall. "I spent about 15 years hating rice congee because of what it reminded me of. Then I was in Singapore for a conference about 6 years ago, and I ordered it by accident. I thought I was ordering something else. And it tasted exactly the same." A pause. "I cried in a hotel restaurant in front of a table of executives from 3 countries. Landon was quiet. "I don't know why I told you that," she said. "Probably because it's 4 in the morning and you've been in a car accident and there's no one else here," he said. "Yes." She almost smiled. "Probably that." He got up and poured water from the emergency canteen into the tin cup he'd found in the cabin's supply shelf and brought it to her. She took it with her right hand and drank without comment, which meant she was thirstier than she'd been admitting. He gave her the second half of the protein bar. She looked at it. "Eat it," he said. What will you have? I'm fine. That's not an answer either. Eat it, Vivian. She ate it. He watched to make sure she was chewing properly and not favoring the left side of her jaw, which could mean something he hadn't caught on the initial assessment. She wasn't. She ate like someone who'd skipped dinner, which she probably had, driving through a mountain pass in a level 2 weather event instead of stopping. When did you last eat? He asked. Yesterday morning. She registered his expression. I had a lot of calls. That's not... He stopped. She clearly knew. Okay. You were going to say that's not healthy. I was going to say it explains the shock progression. Same thing, stated clinically. She handed back the empty wrapper. I do know it's not healthy. I know a great number of things about myself that I don't do anything about. Most people are like that. Most people aren't running a company that... She stopped, started again. Most people aren't in a position where what they don't fix actually hurts someone. He looked at her. The firelight caught the left side of her face and left the right in shadow, and she was looking at her hands in that way people look at their hands when they're holding something they haven't decided what to do with yet. The policy, she said. The one that denied Ella's claim. It's part of a cost containment framework that the CFO's office implemented 18 months ago. Before I took the role. I know. She looked up. You looked into it. When I filed the first appeal, I talked to a healthcare attorney who explained the framework, inherited policy from the previous CEO. He kept his voice flat. That doesn't make it less wrong. No, she said. It doesn't. She looked back at her hands. When you come into a role and there are existing structures, the default is to evaluate what's working and address what isn't working according to metrics. The framework was showing acceptable loss ratios. The denial rates looked like... She stopped. They looked like numbers. On a report. They're not numbers. I know that. She said it sharply, then caught herself. I know that, she said again, quieter. I'm explaining how it happened, not why it's acceptable. There's a difference? There has to be, she said. Otherwise, everything that went wrong is just... She looked for the word. Indifference. And I don't... She stopped again. The fire snapped. She looked at it for a long moment. I didn't go into this industry out of indifference. I know that too, he said. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not cracking, not collapsing, but opening slightly in the way a door opens when the latch finally gives. How do you know that? She said. You don't know me. I know that your father spent his career angry about systems that moved too slow and that you chose the path you did because you thought you could fix it faster from above, Landon said. I know you remembered Ella's claim number when you were in shock, and you filed it somewhere you could find it again. I know you didn't promise anything tonight, which means when you do promise something, you mean it. He paused. I know you didn't ask me once to call your lawyers or your PR team or your board. People who care primarily about appearances do that first thing. Vivian Sterling looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. You're very observant, she said. I was paid to be. You're still doing it. Habits don't stop because the paycheck does. She was quiet. Outside, a tree somewhere close to the cabin gave way. Not the long, dragging crash of the earlier falls, but a sharp crack and then a sustained tearing sound, and both of them went still and listened to where it was going. It went away from the cabin. They both let out the breath they'd been holding without acknowledging that they'd been holding it. That's going to happen all night, he said. I know. Looked at the roof. Cabin is solid. Been here since the 80s. Foundation's on bedrock. That's reassuring. It is. She shifted again on the cot, more carefully this time, and he watched her settle without moving to help because she hadn't asked and she was managing. He was learning her rhythms, when she needed the help and when offering it would be an intrusion she'd resent, and there was a narrower margin between those two things than he'd initially expected. It was somewhere around 5:15 when her breathing changed again. He'd been watching the window. He wasn't watching her. He heard it. The quality of it shifted, went shallower, and when he turned, she was holding herself very still with both hands pressed flat against the cot on either side of her hips, the way you hold yourself when you're trying to stay ahead of something that is trying to get ahead of you. He was across the room in 3 steps. Tell me. It got harder. Her voice was controlled but thin. The breathing. You said to tell you when it got harder. When did it start? 2 minutes? Maybe 3. Her jaw was set. I didn't want to. I wasn't sure if it was just anxiety. It's not anxiety. He was already kneeling, ear to her back, listening. The left side had changed, not dramatically, not the catastrophic silence of a full collapse, but the sound was wrong in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. A slight decrease in air movement, muffled at the base. He pulled back and looked at her face. Her color was off again, Cham, not the wax pale of the earlier shock, but something more gray at the edges, around her mouth. Okay, he said, and he meant it differently this time. Not, it's fine. More like, I see this and I'm handling it. I need you to sit up straighter. Can you do that? Yes. She straightened, and he helped her, one hand between her shoulder blades. What's happening? Possible partial pneumothorax. The rib fracture may have nicked the pleural lining. He said it straight because she would want it straight, and because soft-pedaling medical information to people who could handle it was a waste of both of their time. It's not a tension pneumo. Your trachea's midline, your color's off, but not critical. But we need to keep you upright, and I need you to breathe as fully as you can. That hurts. I know it hurts. Do it anyway, she breathed. He watched. The first 3 breaths were shallow, and he could see her fighting herself. The pain instinct pulling inward, his instruction pulling out. And then she overcame it by will and took a real breath, deep enough that her shoulders rose, and the sound she made at the top of it was the worst sound he'd heard from her all night. Again, he said. Landon. Again, Vivian. Full breath. She did it again and again. On the 4th breath, the sound at the top of it was slightly less terrible, which was something. He got the radio. Press transmit. Dale, this is Landon. I need you to copy this. Survivor's condition has changed. Possible partial pneumo, left side. She needs to be on oxygen when your team reaches us, and she needs imaging immediately on arrival at the hospital. Do you copy? A long burst of static. Then, copy. Possible pneumo. Medical team is... The voice cut out and came back. Oxygen ready. How is she? Stable but moving. Tell the team left side, base of the 5th. Copy? He set the radio down. Vivian was watching him with those eyes that were still refusing to fully show what was behind them, but the edges had gone tight in a way that was harder to contain than the rest of her expression. She was scared. She was managing the scared the way she managed everything, by holding very still and applying pressure. But it was there. Tell me what stable but moving means, she said. It means you're not in immediate danger, but we need to manage this carefully until the team gets here. How carefully? Position, breathing, staying calm. He met her eyes. You're good at 2 of those 3. I'm calm. You're controlled. That's different. She opened her mouth and then closed it. He saw her decide something. I'm scared, she said, flat, like a report. I know. I don't... She stopped. I don't do well with things I can't control. Nobody does. I do less well than most people. Possibly, he said. But you've done all right tonight. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not gratitude exactly, which she probably would have deflected, but something in the neighborhood of it. He pulled the chair to the side of the cot where he could watch her and be within arm's reach, and he sat down and talked to her. He talked the way he used to talk to his guys on long transits, not about anything important, not about anything that required her to engage emotionally, just a steady low current of human sound that gave the mind something to orient to instead of the pain. He talked about the resort, about the specific comedy of managing maintenance on a 4,300-acre property where something was always broken in a way that was entirely preventable and yet had not been prevented. He talked about a recurring feud between 2 of his crew members over the correct procedure for winterizing the lakeside pump station that had been going on for 6 months without resolution. He talked about a raccoon that had somehow gotten into the HVAC system on the east wing of the main lodge and had stayed there for 4 days before anyone could figure out where the noise was coming from. Vivian Sterling, CEO of Meridian Health Corporation, with 2 cracked ribs and a partial lung collapse and a cut above her hairline held together with butterfly strips, sat upright on a ranger cabin cot at 5 in the morning and listened to him talk about a raccoon in an HVAC system with her full attention. At one point she said, "How did you get it out?" "Peanut butter," he said, "on a live trap by the intake vent." "That's," she breathed carefully, "that's actually elegant."
Dale thought it was ridiculous. Dale was wrong. I know, he admitted it eventually. She almost smiled. Kept the almost smile small and careful because of the ribs, but it was there. He checked her breathing every 10 minutes. It wasn't getting worse. It wasn't getting better, but not worse was what he needed right now, and he would take it. Around 6 in the morning, she said, "The framework." He'd been watching the window. Dawn was trying again, a faint, reluctant gray at the edges of the black. What about it? The cost containment framework, the one that denied Ella's claim. She was looking at the ceiling, breathing measured. There are others like her in the system, children. Yes. I know that academically. I've seen the aggregate denial rates for pediatric procedures. A pause. I've never sat in front of one of their parents before. He didn't say anything. I've never... She stopped, started again. The reports come across my desk and they're about populations, risk pools, statistical distributions. Her jaw tightened. They're about a 7-year-old who coaches soccer from the sideline and calls her stuffed elephant Gerald. And I didn't know that. I've been signing off on the framework that creates those outcomes, and I genuinely... She stopped. "Go on," he said. "I didn't know," she said, and the flatness in her voice this time was different from the controlled flatness. It was the flatness of someone looking at something they can't unflatten again. I knew it intellectually. I knew people were behind the numbers, but knowing it intellectually is not the same as... She looked at him. "I pulled Ella's face from the way you described her. That's the first time I've had a face." Landon was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked. "I don't know yet." She said it without the corporate hedging, without the "I'll need to consult with the relevant team's" language. Just the plain truth of it. "I know I'm going to do something. I know the framework is going to look different when I get back to a desk than it did when I left." She breathed. "I know that Ella's appeal is not going to take 60 to 90 business days." He looked at her. "Don't say that if you don't mean it." "I mean it. People say things in extremity that... Landon." She said his name the way he'd said hers the night before, once, quietly, with a weight that meant stop. "I mean it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and looked back at the window. The gray was getting less reluctant. The rain was thinning, not stopping, but pulling back from the assault it had been running all night into something more like ordinary rain. He could see individual trees now, their shapes emerging from the black, dark columns in the pale early light. At 6:40, the radio crackled and Dale's voice came through clean for the first time all night. "Landon, road crew just punched through the last debris section. Medical team is 12 minutes out. How's your survivor?" Landon looked at Vivian. She was upright, both hands flat on the cot, breathing with the careful deliberateness she'd been maintaining for the last 90 minutes. Her color was still gray at the margins. Her eyes were clear. "She's here," he said into the radio. "Tell your team left side, base of the 5th, possible partial pneumo. Also head injury, probable rib fractures at 5 and 6. She needs a chest x-ray and CT head as priority 1. "Copy that. 12 minutes." He set the radio down. Vivian let out a long, controlled breath. 12 minutes, she said. "Yeah. I've been in board meetings that lasted longer than 12 minutes and felt significantly worse." He looked at her. "That was a joke," she said. "I know. It wasn't very good. I'm running on no sleep and a punctured lung. My comedy timing is compromised." "It's partial," he said. "The pneumo, not punctured." "The distinction seems technical from where I'm sitting." He got up from the chair and started organizing the medical kit. Not because it needed organizing, but because 12 minutes was long enough to do something useful and short enough that stillness felt wrong. He broke down what he'd used, inventoried what was left, folded the emergency blankets in a way that would make them easy to access if the team needed them. "Landon," he turned. She was looking at him with that direct look again. the one she used when she'd made a decision about something and was stating it rather than opening a discussion. "I want you to know something," she said, "before they get here and it becomes... before there are other people and lawyers and company protocols and all of that." She paused. "You didn't have to come down that ravine." "Yeah, I did." "Technically." "No," he said. "I mean, I did. There's no version of me that hears a car go over a guardrail and drives away." He looked at her. "That's not a virtue. It's just how I'm built." "Maybe," she said, "but you knew who I was when you got me out of that window. You knew what my company did to your daughter, and you got me out anyway, and you spent 9 hours keeping me alive, and you never..." She stopped. "You were angry. I could see it, but you never used it against me." "Would it have helped anything?" "No." "Then what would be the point?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Most people are not built the way you are. Most people haven't had the same practice," he said simply. A sound came from outside, but a different sound from the trees and the rain, a mechanical sound that grew and separated into the distinct noise of a vehicle on the service road, tires on wet gravel, and then headlights swept across the cabin window. Vivian closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, she was already reassembling the surface. He could see it happening, the slight straightening, the expression moving toward neutral. And he understood it was not dishonesty. It was the armor going back on before the outside world came in. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "The claim number," he said. "You still have it?" She touched her temple. "Right here." "Okay." He looked at the door. The vehicle had stopped outside and he could hear doors and voices and the sound of equipment being unloaded from a truck bed. "Okay." He opened the cabin door and the cold morning air came in, carrying rain and pine and the smell of turned earth. And the medical team came through it in their orange vests with their cases and their oxygen and their professional calm, and the night began to end. He stepped back against the wall and let them work, watching their hands on her, watching her face as she answered their questions in the clipped, precise way she answered everything, watching her color as the oxygen mask went on and something in her shoulders dropped a half-inch that she probably didn't know they dropped. One of the medics, a young woman with short red hair who moved like someone who'd been doing this since before she looked old enough to, glanced over her shoulder at Landon. "You the one who's been managing her?" "Yes." "Good management," she said, already turning back. "She's better than she should be given the mechanism." He didn't say anything to that. He watched them stabilize her for transport, watched them get the backboard positioned, watched Vivian go through the careful process of being moved by people who knew how to move injured people. And throughout all of it, she was controlled and precise and answered every question without complaint. They were getting her to the door when she turned her head and found him against the wall where he'd been standing. "You're coming to the hospital," she said. "Not a question. I need to check on the road damage for the resort," he said, "and I need to get to Ella." After that, he looked at her. "I don't think there's much more I can do." "I'm not asking for medical help," she said. "I'm asking you to come." A pause. "Please?" He looked at her a moment longer. The oxygen mask had been moved to the side for transport, and without it her face was just her face. No makeup left, the butterfly strips above her hairline, the shadows under her eyes that had been building all night. She looked entirely unlike the kind of person whose name appeared on letterheads that changed people's lives, and also entirely like her. "Okay," he said. They took her out into the pale morning rain. He stood in the doorway of the cabin for a moment, looking at the fire he'd need to properly extinguish. The chair he'd sat in all night, the cot with the indentation where she'd been, the empty tin cup, the protein bar wrapper folded in half. He went back inside and dealt with the fire, did it correctly, the way it should be done, and left the cabin cleaner than he'd found it, which was a habit that had nothing to do with the circumstances and everything to do with who he was. Then he walked out into the morning. The drive down the mountain took 40 minutes in the medical transport vehicle, and Landon followed in his truck with the heater running full and the radio off. The service road was passable, but barely. The road crew had cut through the debris slide with a dozer, leaving raw walls of displaced earth on either side that still wept brown water across the gravel. He drove through it slowly, watching the walls, reading the soil the way he'd been reading terrain his entire adult life.
And what it told him was that the slide wasn't finished. There was more weight above the cut, more saturation, and when the second system moved through, it was going to move again. He made a mental note to flag it for the county when he got to a desk, then realized he was making maintenance notes in his head while running on no sleep after a night that had rearranged several things he'd thought were permanent about his situation, and almost laughed. Almost. He stopped at the Pruitt house first. It was 7:20 in the morning, and Karen already had the porch light on, which meant she'd been tracking his truck on the service road with her kitchen window. She opened the door before he reached the steps. "She's still asleep," Karen said, reading his face. "She was up until 11 asking Dale questions about the slide. He answered about half of them before he ran out of answers she'd accept." "That sounds right." "You look terrible." "I'm okay." "I didn't say you weren't okay. I said you look terrible." She stepped back from the door. "Come in and eat something before you go to the hospital." He started to say he was fine, and then his body, which had been waiting politely for him to stop moving, made its position clear. His knees had stiffened in the truck, and the cut on his palm from the rope descent, which he hadn't thought about once during the night, had dried into a dark line that pulled when he flexed his hand. He went inside. Karen made eggs and toast and set it in front of him at the kitchen table without asking what he wanted, and he ate it without tasting it and drank 2 cups of coffee while Dale spread a county map on the other end of the table and asked him about the road. He told Dale what he'd seen: the walls, the saturation, the secondary risk. Dale listened with his coffee in both hands and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the way he listened when he was storing information rather than processing it in real time. And when Landon finished, he said, "I'll call county and the resort's legal team this morning. You want me on record as the source?" "You're the foreman." "That's a yes." Dale folded the map. "The woman in the car, she going to be all right?" "They think so. Partial pneumo, rib fractures, head injury. She'll need surgery possibly. Imaging definitely." "She know you knew who she was?" "Yeah." Dale was quiet for a moment. "How'd that go?" Landon looked at his coffee. "It went." Dale didn't push it. That was one of the things about Dale. He understood the exact acreage of other people's business and stayed off it. He picked up his own coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the gray morning where the rain had dropped to a fine mist. "Ella's going to want details," he said. "I know." "She's going to want all of them." "I know, Dale." From down the hall came the sound of small feet on floorboards. Not the careful, quiet feet of a child trying not to be heard, but the direct, purposeful feet of a child who had already decided to be somewhere and was en route. Ella appeared in the kitchen doorway in the Seahawks jersey, her hair worse than it had been the previous morning, Gerald hanging from her right hand by one ear. She looked at her father. He looked at her. "You were gone all night," she said. "There was a slide on Route 9. Someone needed help." She studied him with the particular thoroughness she applied to things she wasn't sure she was getting the whole truth about. Her eyes went to the cut on his hand, to the state of his clothes, to his face, which he knew from long experience did not look like someone who'd had a quiet night. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." "That cut it's minor. I'm okay, Bug." She crossed the kitchen and climbed up onto the stool beside him without being invited and looked at his plate. "You ate Karen's eggs." "They're good eggs." "They are," she agreed. She looked at his hand again. Then she put Gerald on the counter and reached over and put her small hand over his. Not over the cut, on the other side of it, just her hand on his hand. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. Karen, at the counter, was very busy with the coffee pot. "Can I come with you today?" Ella asked. "I have to go to the hospital." "I know. Can I come?" He thought about Vivian Sterling in a hospital bed and Ella in a hospital waiting room and the particular mathematics of what either of them was ready for. "Not today," he said. Ella considered this, which was different from accepting it. "Is it the person from the car?" "Yeah." "Are they going to be okay?" "I think so." She nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Then she said, "Is it the insurance lady?" He looked at her. "I heard you and Karen talking," she said, with the complete absence of guilt of someone who views eavesdropping as basic information gathering. "Ella, is it?" she said. He looked at his daughter for a long moment.
at her direct brown eyes and the cowlick that had never once cooperated with a brush and the faint scar on her chin from a playground fall 2 years ago. And he thought about how much of his adult life had been organized around protecting her from information she wasn't ready for, and how consistently he'd underestimated what she was ready for. "Yeah," he said, "it's her." Ella was quiet. She looked at Gerald, then she looked back at her father. "Good that you saved her then," she said. "She can't fix anything if she's dead." He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure one was needed. Coet. Cascade Valley Medical Center was 40 minutes from the mountain on clear roads, which that morning were not quite clear but close enough. Landon parked in the main lot and sat in the truck for a minute, not out of hesitation, but out of the ordinary human necessity of shifting gears between different kinds of situations. He'd been running on operational mode for 9 hours. The hospital was not a place where operational mode was the right setting. He dialed it back, got out, and went inside. The woman at the front desk told him Vivian Sterling was in radiology. He found a waiting area on the second floor and sat in a plastic chair and waited, which was something he was good at when he had to be. A man in a dark suit found him 20 minutes later. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with the groomed, slightly pressurized look of someone whose job was to stand between a problem and the people who would make the problem worse. He sat down in the chair beside Landon without asking if it was available. "Mr. Hayes." His voice was neutral in the way voices are neutral when the person using them has had extensive practice being neutral. "My name is Richard Oakes. I'm Meridian Health Corporation's head of legal operations." Landon looked at him. "How'd you get here this fast?" "I was at the Whitmore signing in Spokane. 2 hours." He set a slim leather folder on his knee. "I want to be very clear about why I'm here. Miss Sterling's personal safety and medical care are the absolute priority, and nothing I'm going to say should be interpreted as superseding that." "But there are going to be liability questions," Oakes said, "regarding the accident site, the road conditions, the resort's maintenance responsibilities. I want to get ahead of those on the company's behalf. I'm not the resort's legal representation." "I know, but you were present." He paused. "And I understand you provided significant medical assistance through the night." "I did what I could with what I had." The medical team said her condition on arrival was considerably better than it should have been given the severity of the impact. Oakes looked at him with an expression that was trying to be appreciative and landing somewhere short of it. "We're grateful." "You can tell that to the billing department," Landon said. Oakes looked at him. "I'm sorry?" "I'm not interested in gratitude from Meridian's legal team," Landon said. "If you have questions about the accident site, I'm happy to answer them. If you're here to assess what the company's exposure might be because of what happened last night, I'll refer you to the resort's office." Oakes was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be straightforward with you." "Good. I'm aware of your daughter's insurance claim. I was briefed on it this morning." Something went careful in Landon's chest. He kept his face neutral. "I want you to know," Oakes continued, "that the company is going to do right by your daughter. Ms. Sterling has already, before the imaging was even complete, she called me from the CT suite, on a hospital phone because her cell was destroyed in the accident. She told me the claim was to be flagged for immediate executive review and that the denial was to be reversed pending clinical confirmation, which I don't anticipate will be an issue given the documentation." He paused. "I'm saying this not because it changes what we're discussing, but because I want you to know it's already in motion." Landon looked at the man for a long moment. He was trying to determine whether this was real or whether it was the kind of real that came with conditions he couldn't see yet. The problem was that he wasn't good at reading lawyers in the same way he was good at reading terrain. Lawyers had their own particular weather systems. "Confirmation in writing," Landon said. "Of course." "From Ms. Sterling, not from the appeals department." Oakes nodded once. "I'll have something drafted today." Landon looked at the elevator, then back at Oakes. "Is that all?" "Nearly." Oakes shifted the folder. "The company would like to cover the medical costs incurred by any injuries you sustained last night." "I'm not injured." Oakes looked at the cut on his hand. "That's not an injury," Landon said. Oakes closed the folder. He looked like a man who had come in expecting a particular kind of conversation and had gotten a different one and was recalibrating.
You're a hard man to help, Mr. Hayes. I don't need help from Meridian's legal office, Landon said. I need Ella's surgery approved, covered, and scheduled. If that's happening, we're done. Oak stood, extended his hand. Landon looked at it for a beat. Not hostility, just the honest assessment of what the gesture meant. And then shook it. It's happening, Oak said. He left. Landon sat back in the plastic chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed for a minute. He felt the thing in his chest that he'd been holding compressed since the morning of the denial letter. Not releasing, not yet, because he'd learned not to let go of things until they were confirmed and completed, but shifting, moving, like a stone that had been fixed in one place for 11 days and had just moved a centimeter. It wasn't enough yet, but it was something. They let him see her at 9:40. She was in a private room on the 3rd floor, which did not surprise him. She'd had surgery. The partial pneumothorax had required a chest tube, which she explained to him with the precise, slightly annoyed tone of someone describing something that had happened to their car, and was propped up at an angle in the bed with her left arm immobilized and a monitoring line on her right hand and the IV on a stand beside her. There was a clean bandage where the butterfly strips had been, a bruise beginning to bloom along her left cheekbone that hadn't been visible in the cabin's firelight, and dark circles under both eyes that 11 days of sleep wouldn't fully address. She looked, in other words, like someone who'd survived what she'd survived. You took your time, she said. I went home first, ate breakfast, showered. He looked around the room. Your lawyer found me in the waiting area. Oaks. Yeah. What did he say? That the claim is being reversed. That's not what I asked you. He looked at her. He said it in the way lawyers say things when they're not sure if the person they're saying it to is going to be a problem. Are you going to be a problem? Depends on whether the claim actually gets reversed. She held his gaze. It's going to get reversed. It's already done on my end. Oaks is handling the administrative side, which takes time because everything administrative takes time, but the decision is made. She paused. I called him from the CT machine. The technician was very patient about it. He mentioned, I imagine he didn't love that story. He told it neutrally. She shifted slightly and the monitoring line tugged, and she made the controlled sound that meant the tube in her side, which he recognized now as distinctly different from the sound she made for the ribs. Sit down, she said. You look like you're about to leave. I have to get back to... Sit down, Landon. 5 minutes. He sat in the chair beside the bed. It was more comfortable than the cabin chair, which was not a high bar to clear. She looked at him for a moment with those assessing eyes. In the clinical light of the hospital room, she looked different than she had in the firelight, more tired, more exposed, and somehow more like herself in that exposure, as if the fire's warm light had been doing her surface a service it didn't need. The Whitmore deal, she said. I heard it mentioned. It closed this morning. My CFO ran the signing. She looked at the window, which showed a rectangle of gray Pacific Northwest sky. I'm told it went well. Congratulations. I told Oaks to hold the announcement. He looked at her. The deal announcement, she said. Usually there's a press release, interviews, the whole infrastructure of corporate victory. I asked him to hold it for 30 days. She paused. I want to have something else to announce at the same time. He waited. The framework, she said. The cost containment framework. I'm pulling it. She said it the way she said most important things. Directly, without the cushioning language that people used when they wanted the credit for saying something without the accountability of having said it. Not modifying it, pulling it. And the clinical review process for pediatric denials is going to be rebuilt from scratch with outside medical oversight, not internal. She looked at him. And I'm going to need to fire some people, which is... She stopped. I don't enjoy that. I know people think executives enjoy it. I don't. Who? The CFO, who implemented the framework without adequate clinical oversight. 2 members of the medical review board who I now understand had significant financial incentive to maintain high denial rates. Her jaw tightened slightly. And possibly my own chief medical officer, which is going to be complicated because he's been with the company 11 years and he's talented and he genuinely believes the framework was defensible. The believing it was defensible is part of the problem. Landon was quiet. You're not reacting, she said. I'm listening. People usually react when I tell them I'm planning to fire senior executives. Do they? Yes. Either they think it's too much or they think it's not enough. She looked at him. What do you think? I think those are operational decisions that you know more about than I do, he said. I think if the framework was causing children to be denied medically necessary procedures, it needed to go. I think you know that better than I do now. He looked at the window. I think you probably also know that none of it, the framework, the people, the new process, fixes what happened to the families who were denied while it was running. No, she said, it doesn't. So what does? She was quiet for a moment. He hadn't meant it as a challenge. He'd meant it as an actual question, the way he asked actual questions, without the diplomatic padding around them. I've been thinking about that since 4 a.m, she said. Since the raccoon in the HVAC system, actually. Somewhere in there, I started thinking about it and haven't stopped. She looked at her immobilized left hand. There's a model that some healthcare foundations use. A direct assistance fund for pediatric surgical cases that fall into coverage gaps. Families who've been denied, families who are in the appeal process, families who don't have the resources or the knowledge to navigate the system. She paused. I want to build something like that, properly funded, not as a PR exercise. I've seen those and they're insulting. Something that actually moves fast enough to matter. How fast? Fast enough that a 7-year-old doesn't have to wait 60 to 90 business days while her window narrows. She looked at him directly. I know I can't undo what those 11 days cost you. I know Ella is not the only child this affected, and I know that saying I'm going to fix it doesn't fix the time that's already passed. She stopped. I'm saying it anyway because I need you to hear that I understand the full scope of what I'm describing, not just the headline version. He looked at her for a long moment. You're going to get a lot of pushback, he said. From the board, yes. From the CFO's office, certainly. From the segment of the investor base that is going to read pulling the cost containment framework and immediately translate it into margin impact. She exhaled carefully around the chest tube. I've been doing this long enough to know how to manage pushback. Is that the right word for it? Manage? She caught it. Survive it, then. Is that better? It's more accurate. She almost smiled. You're going to be insufferable to debate, aren't you? I'm not debating you. You're doing the thing where you find the exact word that reframes the entire premise. I'm a practical person. You said that last night. I think you're underselling yourself. He looked at his hands. The cut was tightening as it dried, and he flexed his palm carefully. Ella's surgery, he said. When can it be scheduled? I spoke with Dr. Chu's office this morning. She said it without ceremony. Her office called me back inside of 20 minutes, which tells me she's been ready and waiting. The surgical team at Cascade Valley Pediatric has an opening in 11 days. If that's too soon, Dr. Chu said. 11 days is not too soon, Landon said. Okay. Something crossed Vivian's face. The particular expression of someone who has just done something that cost them very little but mattered enormously and is calibrating what that means. Okay, he nodded once. I'd like to meet her, Vivian said. Ella. When, not now, not this week, but when things are... She stopped. I understand if you'd rather I didn't. He thought about his daughter on the kitchen stool that morning, her hand over his. Good that you saved her then. She can't fix anything if she's dead. I'll ask her, he said. She'll probably have questions. I'd expect nothing less. She'll probably also try to coach you. In what? Whatever she's currently focused on. Last month it was chess strategy. Before that it was the most efficient route for garbage trucks in our neighborhood. He looked up. She'd drawn a map. Vivian's face did something he hadn't seen it do before. Opened, fully, without the fractional holding back she applied to everything. It lasted only a second and then the control was back. But it was there, and he saw it. She sounds extraordinary, she said. She's 7, he said. She's a mess half the time. She left a bowl of cereal on top of the refrigerator last week, and when I asked her why, she said she needed to check if it was a good vantage point. He paused. I genuinely don't know what that means, and I've stopped trying to find out.
Vivian laughed, actually laughed, with her eyes and not just her face, the kind of laugh that costs something when you have a chest tube and doesn't care, and then pressed her hand to her side and made the sound. "Stop being funny," she said. "I'm not trying to be." "That's what makes it worse." She breathed through it. Her color was better than it had been in the cabin. The oxygen and the warmth and the IV fluids had brought something back. "Go home," she said. "Go get Ella. Sleep." "In that order?" "In whatever order makes sense." She looked at him with a directness that had something in it he wasn't going to name yet, partly because he was too tired to name things accurately, and partly because things unnamed stayed simple longer, and simple was what he had room for right now. "I meant what I said last night, about the claim number, about all of it. I know. I want you to know I know you know." He looked at her. "That sentence was worse than I intended it to be," she said. "It was. I'm running on anesthesia." "I know." He stood. She watched him stand in the way she watched everything, posteen, fully, without the performance of not watching that most people engaged in. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "There's going to be a press cycle," she said, "when the announcement happens. The company changes, the foundation, the framework reversal. Your name—" She stopped. "I want to ask you how you want your name handled, if it comes up." He looked at her. "My name? You're part of the story, whether we acknowledge it or not. What happened on that mountain is—" She paused. "People are going to want to know." He thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Leave it out." She nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that. Then why'd you ask?" "Because some people say they want to be left out, and then are bothered when they are." She looked at him steadily. "You're not one of those people." "No," he agreed. He put on his jacket. He looked at the room, the monitors, the IV stand, the rectangle of gray sky in the window, the woman in the bed who 11 hours ago had been upside down in a ravine above a rising creek. He was tired enough that everything had the slightly unreal quality that came with the far edge of an adrenaline cycle, where things that were plainly real looked like they needed confirmation. "Rest," he said. "Don't argue with the nurses." "I don't argue." "You absolutely argue." She considered this. "I clarify." "Rest," he said again. "I'll be in touch when the surgery's scheduled." He walked to the door. "Landon." He turned. She was looking at him from the bed with both hands in her lap, and the morning light coming through the window behind her, and the bruise on her cheek, and the bandage at her hairline, and all the rest of it. And what her face said in that moment was something she didn't have the words for yet. Or maybe she had the words and she was choosing not to use them, which with her amounted to the same thing. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. Not the saving, I know you'll say that was just how you're built. For the rest of it. For not leaving the cabin dirtier than you found it. For the raccoon story." A pause. "For talking to me about Ella." He stood in the doorway. "How do you know I didn't leave it dirtier?" "Because you're you." He didn't have an answer for that either. He nodded once and walked out. In the elevator going down, he leaned against the back wall and looked at the ceiling and let himself feel, for the first time in 11 days, something adjacent to hope. Not the thing itself. He'd learned to be careful about the thing itself, but the shape of it, the outline. The way a room looks when someone has just turned on a light and the next one over and you can see the line of brightness under the door. He drove back to the Pruitt house. Ella was waiting on the porch steps with Gerald on her lap, and a book open that she wasn't reading. She stood up when his truck turned into the driveway, and the way she stood, the particular way she held herself, the angle of her chin, the feet-apart posture of someone who had been waiting with patience that cost her something, was so completely the shape of the person he had spent 7 years building his life around that it sat behind his sternum and pressed. He got out of the truck. "How is she?" Ella asked. "She's going to be okay." Ella nodded. Then, "Did she say anything about the surgery?" "Yeah." He walked up to the steps and sat down beside her, and she settled back next to him, Gerald between them, the book forgotten on the other side. 11 days, he said. Ella went very still. "That's when it's scheduled," he said. 11 days, Dr. Chu's team.
He watched her absorb it, watched it move through her face in layers. The first layer was the processing. The second was understanding, and the third was the thing she tried to hold back and didn't quite manage. She leaned forward and put her face against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they sat on Karen Pruitt's porch steps in the fine morning rain without saying anything for a while. Then Ella said, against his shoulder, "She really fixed it?" "She really fixed it. Fast."
Faster than 60 to 90 business days. Ella made a sound that was half laugh, half something else.
"I want to meet her," she said. "When I'm better." "She wants to meet you too." Ella was quiet for a moment, then, in the tone of someone setting the terms of a forthcoming negotiation, "I'm going to have questions for her." "I know, Bug. Business ones, about how she runs things." "I figured." "You don't think that's weird?" "I think it's exactly right," he said. She settled back against his arm. Gerald fell sideways off the step, and she caught him without looking, the reflex of 7 years, and tucked him under her other arm. "Dad." "Yeah." "I'm glad you went up the mountain." He looked out at the street, at the mist moving through the Douglas firs at the end of the block, at the particular gray-green of a Pacific Northwest morning after a night of hard weather, when everything smelled of wet earth and the world looked temporarily cleaned. "Yeah," he said, "me too." The 11 days passed, the way days pass when you are waiting for something that matters more than anything else. Not slowly exactly, but with a heightened texture. Each hour slightly more present than hours normally are. Each ordinary thing carrying a weight it wouldn't carry in easier times. Landon went back to work on Monday. The slide on Route 9 had closed that section of highway for 72 hours, and there was enough damage assessment and debris clearing and county coordination to keep him and his crew occupied from first light to dark for most of the week. He filed the report on the secondary slide risk above the road cut, flagged it with the county engineer's office, and followed up twice when he didn't hear back. Not because he expected the follow-up to feel satisfying, which it didn't, but because it was the right thing to do, and he'd stopped requiring satisfaction from right things a long time ago. Ella went to school. She ate her pasta on Tuesday and her leftover whatever it was on Thursday and her pancakes on Sunday, and she did not ask every day about the surgery, which he knew cost her something, and he loved her for it in the particular way you love someone for the things they hold back on your behalf. Dr. Chu's office called on day 3 to confirm the surgical slot and go through the pre-op protocol. Landon sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote everything down in the same careful, sequential way he'd written mission prep. And when the nurse asked if he had questions, he asked 4 of them, all specific, none of them the real question, which was the one you couldn't ask medical professionals because they couldn't answer it honestly, and you couldn't hear the honest answer anyway. The written confirmation from Meridian arrived on day 4. It was on corporate letterhead, that same letterhead, the one he'd memorized against his will, and it was signed by Vivian Sterling directly, not by the appeals department or the clinical review board or Richard Oakes. He read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in the envelope, and set it on the kitchen counter where the denial letter used to be. He threw the denial letter away that evening. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He just put it in the recycling bin on his way through the kitchen, the same as he'd do with any piece of paper he no longer needed. Vivian texted him on day 5. It was a short message. She was being discharged, the chest tube was out, she'd be working remotely from home for 2 weeks under doctor's orders that she was already negotiating with the doctor, and she wanted to know how Ella was doing. He texted back that Ella was fine, that she'd asked him twice about the chess strategy book he'd declined to buy her, and that he'd made the mistake of letting her watch a documentary about urban infrastructure planning, which he was now paying for in dinner conversation. Vivian sent back, "She sounds like exactly who this world needs more of. Give her space to become it." He read that twice, too. He didn't put it on the counter, but he didn't throw it away either. But the morning of the surgery was a Tuesday. He woke at 4:30 without an alarm, which was how he'd been waking every day that week, his body running its own pre-op clock. He showered, made Ella's breakfast even though she wasn't supposed to eat before surgery, and he wasn't hungry. Made it anyway because doing something concrete with his hands was better than sitting with the particular quality of 4:30 in the morning silence that existed in the house when the stakes were high. Ella was awake when he knocked on her door. She was sitting up in bed with Gerald, which she had given up pretending was only for 2 more years, and she was not reading and not doing anything except sitting, which was unusual enough for her that it told him everything he needed to know about the state of things inside that carefully managed exterior. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He sat on the edge of the bed. She leaned against him without saying anything, and he put his arm around her, and they sat like that for a few minutes in the dark while the house was quiet, and outside the first birds were beginning to figure out that it was morning. "I'm not scared," she said. "Okay. I mean, I am, but it's not the big scared. It's more like the before a test scared." "Yeah. Is that weird?" "No," he said. "That's about right." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you scared?" He thought about giving her the version that would be useful for her, and then decided she was asking because she wanted the true version, and she deserved that. "Yeah," he said. "More than before a test." She nodded against his shoulder. "That makes sense. You're my dad." "It does." "You're not going to do anything weird like cry in front of the nurses, are you?" "Probably not." "Probably." "Probably," he confirmed. She made the almost laugh sound. The same sound Vivian had made in the cabin, he noticed, which was the kind of thing you noticed at 4:30 in the morning when everything was slightly too clear. And then she stood up and started getting ready with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had decided that the way through a thing was through it. He drove her to Cascade Valley Pediatric in the dark, and she sat in the passenger seat with Gerald in her lap and looked out the window at the highway and said, "I've been thinking about what I want to do after. After the surgery? After I'm better. Like, what I want to do differently." She looked at the road. "I want to play soccer. Actually play, not just coach." "You can do that." "I know I can do that. I'm saying I want to." She paused. "I also want to write a letter to that insurance lady." He glanced at her. "Not a mean one," she said quickly. "I want to write her a thank you because you said she was going to fix the thing so other kids don't go through what I went through. And I think you should thank people when they do the right thing, even if they had to almost die to get there." He watched the road for a moment. "Where did you get that from?" "I read it somewhere." A pause. "Maybe I made it up. I'm not sure. It's a good thought either way." "I know," she said without a trace of false modesty. He almost laughed. He didn't, but it was close. Beatsunt. Vivian arrived at the hospital at 8:15. She came alone, without Oaks, without an assistant, wearing jeans and a gray coat and a small bandage above her left eyebrow where the laceration had been, and she walked into the pediatric surgical waiting area with the careful movement of someone whose ribs were still reminding her that they existed. She found Landon sitting in the same kind of plastic chair he'd occupied in the adult wing 11 days before, a coffee going cold on the table beside him, and she sat down in the chair 2 seats over and didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at her. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." She looked at the door to the surgical corridor. "What time did they take her back?" 7:50. She nodded. "Dr. Chu said 3 to 4 hours, so we're waiting." "We're waiting," he said. She picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, and set it back down. "I'll get you a fresh one." "You don't have to." "I'm getting myself one too," she said. "I'll be back." She came back with 2 coffees from the cafeteria and sat down, not 2 seats over this time, but 1, and handed him his without ceremony. He took it. They sat. The waiting room had the particular suspended quality of all hospital waiting rooms, a place designed to contain time rather than pass it, where the ordinary metrics of a day didn't apply. 2 other families were there, a grandmother working a crossword, a young couple taking turns sleeping against each other's shoulder. Nobody spoke. The television on the wall was muted and running a home renovation show that nobody was watching. "How are your ribs?" he asked. "Present." She held her coffee in both hands. "The tube site is worse than the ribs, actually. I didn't expect that." "Chest tubes are unpleasant." "That's an understatement." She looked at the surgical corridor door. "How are you doing?" "Ask me in 3 hours." "Fair enough." She didn't try to fill the silence after that, which he appreciated. She sat with it the way she'd sat with the long silences in the cabin. Not fighting them, not performing comfort she didn't feel, just being present in the same space. He'd learned that about her in 9 hours of a mountain night, and it had turned out to be accurate in regular daylight, too. "The CFO is gone," she said after a while. As of Friday. How'd that go? Badly, then worse, then resolved. She looked at her coffee. He said I was making an emotional decision based on an isolated incident. I told him that an isolated incident was exactly how you identified a systemic failure. You found the one case that made the abstract real, and you followed it back to the source. She paused. He said I'd been manipulated. I told him the accusation that someone was manipulated because they changed their mind was the last argument of a person who had run out of real ones. What did he say to that? He cleaned out his desk. She said it without satisfaction. I don't enjoy it. I told you that. I remember. But it was right. And the CMO is going to be a longer process. I'm putting him on a performance review that will probably last 6 months and result in the same outcome. But it needs to be done with more documentation and more care because the circumstances are more complicated. She paused. And the 2 board members with the financial conflict of interest in the denial rates, that's a governance issue that involves the board's own ethics committee, which moves at a pace that makes the clinical review board look like a sprint. But it's moving. It's moving. She looked at him. Slowly and imperfectly and with more resistance than it should have, but it's moving. He nodded. The foundation paperwork was filed last week, she said. It won't be operational for 60 days. There are legal and regulatory steps that I am not allowed to shortcut regardless of how much I would like to. But the funding is committed and the structure is solid. We're calling it the Clear Path Foundation. The mandate is direct assistance for pediatric surgical cases and insurance coverage gaps with a target response time of 72 hours from application to decision. He looked at her. 72 hours. Not 60 to 90 business days, she said. 72 hours. He was quiet. It won't catch everything, she said, and she said it without the corporate hedging, without the framing that made limitations sound like features. There will be cases it misses. There will be families it doesn't reach fast enough. I know that. But it will be something real that moves at the speed that real emergencies require. And that's a different thing than what existed before. Yeah, he said. It is. She looked at the door again. Something in her face had the unguarded quality he'd seen in the hospital room on that first morning. The look of someone who had stopped managing their expression because they were too focused on the thing they were actually feeling. I keep thinking about something you said in the cabin, she said. What? You said abstract revenge and an actual injured person in front of you are 2 completely different things. She held her coffee in both hands. I've been thinking about that in reverse, about how easy it is to approve something when the people it affects are abstract, when they're aggregate data and risk pools, and how completely different it is when they're in front of you. She paused. I've been trying to figure out how to build that, the not abstractness of it, into the company's operating structure. So it doesn't take a car accident and a mountain and a night in a ranger cabin for the person at the top to understand what the numbers mean. How do you do that? I don't know yet, she said. I'm working on it. She glanced at him. I might ask for some input at some point from someone who has a particular experience with the gap between how things look in a report and how they feel on the ground. I'm a maintenance supervisor, he said. You're the most operationally clear-eyed person I've spoken to in 4 years of running a company, she said. The job title is irrelevant. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the door. She wants to write you a letter, he said. Vivian turned. Ella, he said. She told me this morning, a thank you letter. She said you should thank people when they do the right thing, even if they had to almost die to get there. He paused. She's not sure if she read that somewhere or made it up herself. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through her face that was not something he could name and not something she was trying to control. She looked at the window at the end of the waiting room, where the Pacific Northwest morning was doing its usual complicated thing with light and cloud and the particular green of the firs. She doesn't have to, she said finally. I know. She wants to. She nodded once, slowly. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it and didn't say anything else for a while and didn't need to. Well, Dr. Chu came out at 11:47. Landon was standing before she finished pushing through the corridor door. He wasn't aware of deciding to stand. His body had been holding tension in a particular configuration for 4 hours, and when the door moved, the tension found somewhere to go. Dr. Chu was a small Korean-American woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and the particular economy of movement that came from decades of doing precise work in small spaces. She looked at him with the steady, practiced eyes of someone who had walked out of surgical suites to speak to waiting parents more times than she could count. "She did great," she said. Landon put his hand on the back of the chair beside him, not leaning, just needing the contact with something fixed. "The repair went as planned," Dr. Chu continued. "No complications. She's in recovery now, and she's already been awake and complaining about the tube in her arm, which is an excellent sign," he breathed out. It came from somewhere deep enough that he hadn't fully known he'd been holding it. "When can I see her?" he said. His voice came out rougher than he'd expected. 30 minutes, maybe 40. Let the team get her settled." He nodded. Dr. Chu looked past him at Vivian, who had stood when he stood and was still standing. "Ms. Sterling." "Dr. Chu." Vivian's voice was even. "Thank you." "Thank your own clearance team," Dr. Chu said, without unkindness. "This has been approved and ready for 6 weeks. We were waiting on authorization." She looked at Landon. 30 minutes, she said again, and went back through the door. The waiting room was quiet. The grandmother had finished her crossword and left. The young couple in the corner were asleep. The renovation show had been replaced by a cooking show that nobody was watching. Landon sat back down. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and stayed there for a minute. Not crying, not breaking, just occupying the space between what had been and what was now, which was a space that needed a moment to be real. He felt Vivian sit down beside him. Not 2 chairs away, not 1. Beside him. She didn't say anything. She didn't put her hand on his back or offer words that would have been well-intentioned and wrong. She just sat, close enough that he was aware of her presence the way you're aware of warmth from something nearby in a cold space. After a minute, he lifted his head. "She was complaining about the tube in her arm," he said. "I heard. That's Ella." "I know," she said, and then quietly, "I know." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead at the muted cooking show with her coffee held in both hands, and the morning light on the side of her face showing the fading bruise and the fresh scar and all the rest of the story that the last 11 days had put there. And he thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that she was not what he'd expected. Not the letterhead, not the denial letter, not the aggregate of the system she ran. Just a person who had come down a mountain changed, and was in the difficult, imperfect process of becoming something that more closely matched what she'd intended to be when she started. People did that, changed. Not often, and not easily, and not without something forcing the question. But they did it. He knew because he'd done it himself, years ago, when life had required it of him, and he was still in the process, and probably always would be. He thought about what Ella had said. "Good that you saved her then. She can't fix anything if she's dead." 7 years old, and she'd understood immediately what he'd spent a cold, dark night arriving at, that the person in front of you is always more real than the abstraction they represent, and the choice you make about them says everything about the kind of person you are in the spaces where no one is grading you. He wasn't a hero, he was someone who showed up, someone who kept the gear loaded in the back of the truck, not because he expected to need it, but because being ready was a form of respect for the world's tendency toward difficulty. Someone who folded a letter every morning, not out of masochism, but out of the refusal to look away from hard things, which was different from being beaten by them. Ella understood that, in the wordless way children understand the things they've absorbed rather than been taught. She understood it because she'd watched him do it for 7 years, and she decided to do it herself from her spot on the soccer sideline, coaching kids older than her with the quiet authority of someone who'd figured out early that being useful was better than being comfortable. 38 minutes after Dr. Chu came through the door, a nurse appeared and said they could go back. Landon walked through the corridor with Vivian 1 step behind him, and they turned the corner into the recovery room, and there was Ella. She was small against the hospital bed in the way children are always somehow smaller in hospital beds. And there was a tube in her arm that she was eyeing with the focused irritation of someone who has identified a problem and is developing a plan for it. And her hair was doing 3 different things, and Gerald was on the pillow beside her because the nurses had apparently been persuaded. And when she saw her father, she looked at him with those direct brown eyes and said, "It took forever. 45 minutes.
That's forever in here. She looked past him at Vivian and did the thing she did when she was assessing someone, the full, unblinking inventory that made adults slightly uncomfortable. "You're the insurance lady," she said. Vivian stepped forward to the side of the bed. She looked at Ella with an expression that she wasn't managing at all. "I am. Your face looks better than the pictures online." She said it without any particular intent, just as information. "You had a bad week." "I had an interesting week," Vivian said. Ella considered this distinction. "Dad says interesting is what you call hard things when you're trying to learn from them." Vivian glanced at Landon. "Your dad is right about that." "He usually is," Ella said, with the tone of someone conceding a point they find slightly inconvenient. "Not always." She looked back at Vivian. "I'm going to write you a letter." "I heard. I'd like that." "It's going to have questions in it." She said it as a warning. "I have some things I want to understand about how the system works and why it makes decisions the way it does." "I'll answer everyone," Vivian said. Ella assessed her for another moment, with the particular thoroughness that she usually reserved for instruction manuals and situations she needed to fully understand before she committed to them. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she'd made a decision about something. "Okay," she said. "That's good." She reached over and picked up Gerald and adjusted him slightly on the pillow and then looked at her father. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" she said. He looked at his daughter, at her cowlick, and her Gerald, and her arm with the tube she was still planning to do something about, and her face that was the same face that had been on his refrigerator in a drawing with a rain jacket that was definitely a rain jacket, not a cape. And he felt the thing in his chest that had been compressed for 11 days, and longer than that, longer than the letter, longer than the appeals, longer than a lot of things, finally release. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just like a fist unclenching, like a stone finally rolling the last centimeter it had been 2 days away from rolling. "Yeah," he said. "We can have pancakes." She smiled. It was a 7-year-old smile, complete and uncomplicated and not thinking about anything except that she was hungry and she was going to be okay and tomorrow there would be pancakes. And it was the most honest thing he'd seen in weeks. He sat down in the chair beside her bed. Vivian sat in the chair on the other side. Outside the hospital window, the Pacific Northwest was doing what it always did after a storm, asserting with the particular insistence of a place that had been here long before anyone arrived and intended to be here long after, that it was still standing. The firs were still standing, the ridgeline was still standing, even with its new scar where the mountain had let go. Things broke and things held, and the ones that held did so. Not because they were perfect, but because they were deep-rooted, built right, tended over time. There was nothing profound in that. It was just how things worked. But Landon Hayes, maintenance supervisor and former Navy SEAL and single father, and the man who had gone down a ravine in the dark because there was someone at the bottom of it, had spent enough time in difficult terrain to know that the things that looked ordinary from a distance were sometimes the most solid things there were. He reached over and straightened Gerald on the pillow. Ella pushed Gerald back to where she'd had him. He looked at her. "He was fine," she said. "He was crooked. He was comfortable." He left Gerald where Ella had put him. Some things you let stand.